When we mention the Gulf or Middle East, we quickly think about the oil and gas. But now countries in the regions realizing that climate change is real, global warming is real, and it is affecting everyone, including us. So we are really trying to navigate our pathways in terms of how we can reduce the emissions that comes from the oil and gas, but also how we can make the transition towards the alternatives.
Hello and welcome to Green Shift, where we try to make sense of sustainability. I'm your host, David Austin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Victor Nian, founding co-chairman of the Center for Strategic Energy and Resources, CSER. And joining us today is Dr. Aisha Al-Sarihi, an expert in environmental policy and energy transitions across the Gulf and Asia. She's currently a non-resident fellow at both the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, as well as at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. Today, she'll help us unpack the evolving relationship between the Middle East and Southeast Asia in the green transition, from trade and renewables to regional cooperation and climate diplomacy. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. It is my pleasure to be with you today.
I understand that you and Victor have worked together. Do you mind telling me a little bit about how you and Victor met and what you've worked on in the past?
Yes, so I met Victor when I was in Singapore. I was working there over the last 3 years. I was working with the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore, and part of my work is to host coffee mornings where we bring experts in different areas. At the time, we were interested on the evolving role of nuclear energy and meeting the energy security, as well as meeting the climate goals. So we hosted Dr. Victor Nian. And from there, we realized there are other areas of sharing knowledge and also common areas of research, nuclear, energy security, net zero, and sustainability in general. So from that point, we kept in touch, really.
Wonderful. And again, let me just say how excited we are to have you. I understand you've been working on sustainability issues in the Middle East. Could you start by sharing what you see as the most exciting developments currently taking place in the region, and particularly around the circular economy and energy transition?
I am excited to answer this question, and I will explain where the excitement is coming from. As I mentioned, I lived away from Oman for over 12 years. When I started my research back in 2012, and when my PhD thesis really focused on the transition to renewable energy in the Gulf region, there wasn't much really going on. And I remember as part of my PhD research, I needed to do interviews with experts, with practitioners in the renewable energy. And really, I couldn't find enough of interviewees and people to speak to. And I was concerned that will affect my PhD, because for the PhD, you need more than 50 people to speak to when it comes to the interviews. But later on, actually, especially when the Paris Agreement came into force in 2015, there was a shift in the Gulf countries. At the beginning, even when the Paris Agreement came into force, and even though Gulf countries have signed the agreements, at the beginning was a concern on and uncertainty on how the increased climate ambitions and stringent climate policies could affect the economies of the Gulf, especially as we know the Gulf economies depend on the oil and gas resources for their operation. So I know at the beginning, because of those concerns and fear of the uncertainty, there was kind of a defensive approach from the Gulf countries. But really, over time, what I can see today is the opposite. We see that the Gulf countries are taking a proactive approach when it comes to the sustainability and the energy transition. And here is where my excitement comes from. And I can explain it when I moved back to Oman, the profiles that I'm handling is really the low carbon economy, the circular economy, and that really made me excited. And the thing is that, for example, for Oman is committed to achieve net zero by 2050, and this commitment it really came from the top. It came from the Sultan himself. So there's a royal decree to commit to net zero by 2050. And, when it comes from the top, everything trickles down with it. Now, every ministry in the country is trying to navigate their role in how they can contribute in achieving the net zero. So that is like, when I came, I'm like, really, wow, that is exciting. It fits really with my background. And also, like, I can see this kind of like momentum taking place in other countries also in the region.
Yeah, that is very exciting. And it's always good to have the top person setting the course like that.
I can definitely feel the excitement that you have, Aisha. And I do share that excitement myself. I mean, talking about green transition, green growth is always exciting, in whatever context, especially in emerging Asia, where we try to find our way to grow a unique way, our own way of growing the economy without harming the environment. And I think what you're working on could really lead to significant impact in those areas. But I'm also curious to hear, right now in Oman or maybe in the Gulf region, what do you actually see as challenges, towards those green growth strategies or goals?
Energy transition, like if we look at it from a historical perspective, it has always haven't been a straightforward transition. We know, like from historical perspective, we, as a human being, we relied in burning wood for generating energy. Then we slowly moved to the coal, and then oil came into the picture, and most recently the gas. And now we are speaking about something new. We are speaking about renewable energy. We are speaking about the hydrogen and other technologies that clean up the existing energy system, which depends on the oil and gas. So I think really a major challenge is to make the shift, the switch from the oil and gas to the clean energy resources. And we know that the technologies that are used for generating energy from clean energy resources, these technologies is not like 100% mature globally. There are still technical issues with the solar, with the wind energy. If we speak about it from the Gulf perspective, the high temperature, also the dust and the humidity, these are affecting the efficiency of the solar panels. And also, as we know from a global perspective, renewable energy technologies are also intermittent in nature. So we need storage, we need the batteries. And this is something that everyone is really trying to explore. Their technical and economic feasibility is something that we also explore here in Oman. And also there are technical issues that come with expanding the development of renewable energy and its implications to the national grid. And this is also like this kind of technical challenge requires really a collaborative efforts between different stakeholders from different, from the supply, from the demand, from the transmission. So we try to navigate how we can overcome those technical barriers. Maybe because I am speaking about also the energy transition from the Gulf perspective. And maybe when we mention the Gulf or Middle East, we quickly think about the oil and gas. And maybe we quickly think about how we in the region have a vested interest on the oil and gas. And I want to really break that down a little bit. Oil and gas is a wealth that we in the region have been blessed with. So if you have this kind of wealth, you don't just, leave it aside and you work on something else. It is a wealth that helped the region to really prosper from an economic point of view, but it's also the wealth that helped the region to tackle the implications of the climate change itself. As we know, that the region is one of the most affected by the impacts of the climate change when it comes to the temperature. And so the cooling that we have in the buildings, you need that energy that provides the cooling without intermittency. We depend a lot on the cooling, not only as an air conditioner, but also cooling for food. The food needs to be stored in low temperature as well. But also the oil revenues help with the food security. So we need to import food, and the oil and gas was supported in this direction in a way. So, but as I mentioned, now the countries in the regions realizing that climate change is real, global warming is real, and it is affecting everyone, including us. And we need to play our part in also tackling climate change. We do realize that maybe the future of the oil and gas is not something that we can rely on moving forward and in the future. So we are really trying to navigate our pathways in terms of how we can reduce the emissions that comes from the oil and gas, but also how we can make the transition towards the alternatives. There is momentum when it comes to renewable energy, to the hydrogen, to exploring the role of the carbon capture and storage. There are different dimensions that needs to be explored really simultaneously. The technical part of the technology. We need to navigate how we can finance those projects, how we can attract the investments for those projects, and then also the policies and the regulations that support the transition. There would be a space for the trial and error, and also, if I can add, the human capacity building, the skills, and all of that. So it is a multi-dimensional challenge that we do take seriously, and we try to navigate our pathway.
And I wanted to kind of pivot to what you mentioned earlier about hydrogen. I was surprised that Oman is such a large producer of hydrogen. I think it's top 6 in the world, forecasted to be in 2030. So could you speak to the developments there, what the motivation was, what the strategy is, how they're taking advantage of their geopolitical or geographical area in the world, and all of the things that you said that they're blessed with?
Yeah, so, well, thank you so much, Jordan. Hydrogen is one of the other topics that makes me exciting, also being back to Oman. Yes, really, it is taken very seriously in Oman, being a hydrogen supplier, and also one of the forerunners when it comes to the hydrogen. There's a dedicated company that oversees the regulations, the investments, and also trying to overcome the challenges it comes with the hydrogen development. It is called Hydrome. And then also some dedicated departments that explore what it really requires to transition to the hydrogen in different ministries. So basically there is a hydrogen alliance in the country that brings different stakeholders from different departments to work together to build the required momentum. And what is different about Oman, that the country is not really focusing on research and development, but is really taking practical steps towards investment. So in the country, there are already some designated lands for hydrogen investment, so that anyone who is interested to come and invest, there are designated lands. They just need to come and bring their project. And the country has already taken concrete steps in building the partnerships with other countries around the world in terms of like collaboration with the co-creation of the demand, for example, collaboration in terms of the technology transfer, and also the co-investment itself. And there is a target for the hydrogen in Oman as well, in terms of what amount of the production the country is targeting. And I like your point when you mentioned the geopolitical challenges around hydrogen. Even though there are geopolitical changes or political challenges that are going on in the energy market, for example, the new administration in the White House, for example, and the other challenges that comes with hydrogen, Oman didn't stop the momentum with the hydrogen. We keep the momentum going. We keep exploring regardless, because the target is clear.
Could you maybe speak to the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and how that works? And maybe if there's any similarities that you see between them and ASEAN, and then maybe speak to some of the great progress that's taking place. I know the UAE and Saudi Arabia are doing some really great work when it comes to solar and wind, and then how Oman is working with them on those developments.
Middle East and Southeast Asia, I think they are two interesting regions. For me, living in Singapore, it gave me the exposure on the lifestyle in Singapore. It gave me an exposure on the economic development in Singapore and also in the region around it, especially living in Singapore allowed me to travel in the different countries in the region. But it also gave me an exposure on how the different countries in Southeast Asia are also navigating their own energy transition. And also, because I am from the Gulf, most of the time I was making the comparison between the two regions. And what I came up with, I can see that both regions are actually kind of like heading towards the same direction. Both regions have a growth in the population. Both regions have a huge segment of the young population, and both regions are striving for economic growth, and the GDP is increasing in both. Economic diversification is a theme that is shared between the two regions. And also when it comes to the sustainability, both regions are kind of like in the same kind of stages when it comes to exploring their pathway to net zero and the sustainability in general. We have net zero targets in the Gulf. Southeast Asia also have zero targets. As I mentioned, also like we are kind of like exploring on how we can implement the circular economy practices in Oman, but also I did my research in Southeast Asia. Circular economy is also in its early stages in the region. So my conclusion that both regions have similar kind of pathways when it comes where they head in the future. And this is really kind of like creating natural synergy between the two regions where they can really work with one another so they can learn from one another in different areas.
And are there any examples of that you can share, how the two regions can help each other on these pathways?
Yeah. So actually, both regions, although they are geographically apart from one another, but both regions have realized the importance of cooperation with one another. And that goes back in 1980s, really, when the momentum of the formal cooperation between regions has started, when the Council of the Ministers from the GCC decided to kick off formal relations with Far East Asia, including in Southeast Asia. Since then, the relations between the Gulf and Southeast Asia has evolved around trade, cultural, and religion relations. In terms of trade, the flow of the trade, like the Gulf is exporting the oil and the oil derivatives to Southeast Asia, and from Southeast Asia, we have the food that comes to the Gulf, but other also like exports like the vehicles, machines, electronics that comes towards the Gulf. But I would say like apart from that and apart from the religion and the culture, and the religion and culture, because as we know, there's a Muslim population in Southeast Asia, so the Muslim people will come to the Gulf and specifically to Saudi Arabia for Hajj or Umrah. So that was kind of like not for two regions to work together. But apart from that, I think the block-to-block relations didn't take enough of a momentum until most recently. Most recently, we see in 2023, there was the Gulf ASEAN Summit that took place in Riyadh, and it took place at a level of heads of states. So that really gives a signal on how the both region taken the relations in a more serious level. And also, again, the GCC ASEAN Summit has took place this year, in fact, back in June in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur. So this is kind of like giving a signal that both regions are now serious to enhance the relationships. And that has been materialized in different kind of like collaboration. We see that Singapore and GCC have free trade agreement, and then also there's a comprehensive economic partnership agreement that is also being signed. The UAE signed it with Indonesia, with Cambodia, and most recently with Malaysia. And they are also exploring to do it further with other countries in the region. There is also more than that in terms of real co-investments that is taking place between different countries in the two different regions, we see a flow of investment in renewable energy and in sustainability projects from the Gulf in Southeast Asia. I can give example of renewable energy projects. We see that the mega companies or the champion companies when it comes to the energy transition, like Masdar, Mubadala, and Aqua Power, they are investing in renewable energy project in Malaysia and Indonesia. And these projects really exist. There's a floating solar panel in Indonesia that is developed with the UAE Masdar. And also there are projects that look at, developing the mangrove system in Indonesia as well. And I think this is really interesting because in the Gulf also there is mangrove system. But I think this kind of interest in co-investment and co-development in mangrove is not really about sending a signal about the interest in the environment, but it's also one way to collaborate when it comes to the carbon markets and enhancing the collaboration across borders. But also something that you can, if you are in Singapore, you can visit the Muscat Street in Singapore. This is developed through the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Oman in Singapore. And because of the visit of Sultan of Oman, Sultan Haytham, to Singapore last year, also there is like a promise to build a Singapore street in Muscat. So this is kind of signifies the relation between the two regions. And being in Oman, in Muscat, I also miss the Southeast Asian food. So I explored the different restaurants here, the Vietnamese, the Thai food, and I'm trying also to try the Chinese food as well.
And, just hearing you talk about Muscat Street, it triggered a memory, and correct me if I'm wrong. A few years back, didn't Oman send a traditional sailing vessel to Singapore? Is that right, or am I imagining that?
It's true. It is in a museum in Singapore. You can go and see it really. So it is like commemorate like the historical and the ongoing trade relations between Singapore and Oman. So it's physically there. It's you can go and see it.
Okay, great. Victor, let's go and visit that next time we have a day off. Please do.
Yeah,
and you can send me pictures.
Okay.
yeah, we will do that, definitely.
So, as you know, the Middle East sovereign wealth funds and ASEAN's growing clean energy market seem like a natural match. Are we seeing enough green investment flowing between these regions, and what can be done more between them?
I think there is more that can be done between the two regions. Again, before I move to that point, there is also co-investments when it comes to the energy, traditional energy. So like some of the refineries and some of the companies, for example, a Thai company has a stake in the national oil company in Oman. So these kind of co-investments do exist, but I think more needs to be done between the two regions. And I would speak from really like the low carbon economy perspective. As I mentioned, both regions are more or less in the same stages when it comes to the energy transition. And in some way that maybe we can see Southeast Asia has taken an extra step compared to the Gulf and vice versa. So there is a room for both regions to collaborate further when it comes to the know-how in terms of, like, for example, the deployment of certain technologies. When it comes, for example, to the hydrogen production, we know that there are a lot of challenges when it comes to the hydrogen and the use of the technology to produce the hydrogen. Here in the Gulf, one country is more maybe ahead of the other. So in the Gulf itself, like, we can learn from one another, but it also, when it comes to block, maybe the Gulf countries may be ahead in a way to some of the Southeast Asians. So this is also, in a nutshell, the know-how is one area where both regions can work on. And then the other area, I think it is the flow of investment. When I was in Southeast Asia, when I was listening to the experts, especially with the low carbon projects, a main challenge that is mentioned very frequently is the finance of the projects. And this is why we see that the Southeast Asian has, taken a major part of the just transition partnerships. But I think this is an area that the Southeast Asian countries can work with the Gulf, where the Gulf, like the finance, is not pretty much a challenge for the Gulf countries. And here comes the role of sovereign wealth funds, where they can explore areas of co-investment with Southeast Asia countries. And apart from the know-how and the finance, and also I want to mention that now we are talking, and the COP30 is coming, it's around the corner, and one of the thematic areas that will be discussed at COP is the carbon markets. And we see that different countries are now at different stages when it comes to the carbon markets. But I think there is a huge potential of collaboration between the Gulf and Southeast Asia when it comes to the carbon markets, given that the Gulf countries do have the finance for building projects. And in Southeast Asia, it is super green compared to the Gulf countries. So mangrove is one area, but also planting trees and afforestation is an area that the two regions can work on.
I think where the two regions can really complement each other is to learn from each other on the intra-regional collaboration, or maybe even inter-regional cooperation. So you see, ASEAN for so many years been talking about ASEAN energy integration, right? The idea to have an integrated power grid, the idea to have an integrated gas network, and work towards a common power market and common gas market. It has been challenging, but we are making, improvement. At the same time, also the Gulf region is also thinking about regional collaborations in energy issues. So the idea is, because the two regions are very different at the end of the day, each face different challenges. But the thing is, when you look at the two regions together, then what the challenges that's facing the region internally itself may actually be addressed when you actually start to look at inter-regional collaborations. This could be country to country on a bilateral basis. We see a lot of that. And Aisha already gave a lot of examples. And also we could look at maybe even in the future to say that, a multilateral collaborations from some countries in the Gulf and some countries in Southeast Asia could also be a way, going forward. So, for example, hydrogen, the Gulf is looking at hydrogen, Southeast Asia also looking at hydrogen. And certain countries in Southeast Asia are looking at importing hydrogen, like Singapore. Certain countries in Southeast Asia, like Malaysia, are thinking about exporting hydrogen. So then this actually creates both a demand situation within the region. And of course, the Gulf also has its own policy and strategy about whether they want to be a supplier of hydrogen, or maybe also some countries wants to be an importer of hydrogen for whatever objectives and strategy considerations. So in that sense, if the region starts to work together, then we also see a better distribution of renewable energy resources. This is in the context of green hydrogen or green energy, meaning that those that have access green renewables, they can actually produce hydrogen for the rest of the two regions. And the rest of the two regions who doesn't really have that much renewable but needs hydrogen as part of the industrial or climate transformation could also leverage on the same pot of resources. At the same time, then you can think of, when you combine the demand of both the Gulf and the Southeast Asia region, then we can actually look at a much larger scale of demand. And that might also help really form a so-called hydrogen market that everybody is talking about, or maybe a cross-regional energy market, so as a clean energy market.
What is your message to policymakers and business leaders and youth in both regions about the urgency and opportunities of building a shared sustainable future and livable cities? What do you see from your perspective there in Oman right now that you would like to share with people?
What I want to say that sometimes when it comes to the sustainability and the low carbon economic transition, we tend to view it as kind of like a threat to the economic thrive. But I think the sustainability is actually bringing economic opportunities that we need to tap in. It attracts investment, basically, and investments means that we are, supporting the economy, we are creating jobs. But when it comes to, in terms of the urgency, I think also that everyone should understand that, it is not a government project. when it comes to sustainability, but it's everyone project. Everyone should understand that they themselves, they have a role to participate. And that participation depends on how people like see it or view it. Some of the people naturally like interested in protecting the environment, but this is not necessarily true for another person whose interest may be an economic point of view. But again, what I'm saying that sustainability has like economic added value that we can explore and tap in. So yeah, it is everyone's job.
Yes, amen. I feel like you've given us so much good information, and I've learned so much from speaking with you. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that you haven't had an opportunity to say so far?
So I think Southeast Asia, like, is kind of like underestimated from the perspective of the people in here. I mean, a layman person I'm speaking, but for me, I'm glad that I lived 3 years in Singapore and also had a chance to explore other countries in the region. I really learned like there is a lot that we in the Gulf can learn from Southeast Asia in terms of economic development, in terms of tourism, in terms of finance, digital economy. I felt in a way Southeast Asia is kind of like ahead of us in these areas, and that there is room really to explore these. And also, I think Singapore is also setting an example, having a National University of Singapore, one of the top universities. We do have good universities in the regions, but we don't compete with the National University of Singapore because like if you have a strong educational system, then you attract students and then you are feeding in the economy. This is something that we can learn from Singapore. So for me, never underestimate anyone.
Very good lesson.
Well, I've
Yeah.
been here for 23 years now. Yeah, I mean, now in 23 years and counting, I mean, I can see the changes over the decades. That's 2 decades of life here in Southeast Asia. I mean, I can really change and feel the change. I mean, it's changing towards the better. Of course, you have a lot of people complaining about different things, but if you look at the individual countries and the region as a whole, it's made a lot of progress. Either in terms of economic development, industrial development, climate change. Region working together more closely than ever. Looking at ASEAN regional integration, I mean, there has been remarkable achievement. Thinking about a country as diverse as a group of us in Southeast Asia, right? I mean, you can actually see it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you are also welcome to visit the Gulf as well. It is exciting also to be back and also to learn about the advancements in the Gulf as well.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you can come back and talk to us again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to exchange with you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Aisha. Great to have
Thank you,
you.
Dr. Hardwood.
Thank everyone who has been listening or watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, share this episode with a friend, and leave a comment to let us know what you think. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks again, everybody.